Some heroes are loud, some are celebrated, and some never know they're heroes at all. Buck was one of those. He never spoke a word, but he changed the lives of everyone who fought beside him. If you believe animals can be heroes too, consider subscribing. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Now let's begin. In the small town of Riverside, nestled between rolling hills and a winding river, life moved at its own gentle pace. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the morning fog kissed the water's surface, and where a man could find peace in the simple rhythm of casting a line and waiting for a bite. Thomas Edward Hank was such a man. In his late 20s, Tom had built a life around the things he loved: the river, the forest, and the solitude they offered. He wasn't much for words. Never had been. While other young men his age gathered at the town bar, swapping stories and laughter, Tom preferred the company of nature. The whisper of wind through pine trees said more to him than most conversations ever could. Tom lived in a modest cabin at the edge of town, close enough to hear the church bells on Sunday mornings, far enough to feel truly alone when he wanted to be. The cabin had belonged to his father, James Hank, a fisherman like Tom, who had passed away 3 years prior from a heart that simply gave out one winter morning. Tom's mother, Eleanor, lived in the main house in town with Tom's younger sister, Sarah, who was 23 and worked at the general store. Every morning, before dawn broke, Tom would walk down to the dock where his boat waited. It wasn't much to look at, a small fishing vessel he'd named Eleanor's Grace after his mother, but it was sturdy and reliable. Tom would spend his days on the water, checking his nets, catching whatever the river offered: bass, catfish, sometimes trout if he was lucky. In the afternoons, when the fish weren't biting, he'd take his rifle into the woods and hunt deer or rabbit, always taking only what he needed, always respecting the land that provided for him. The townspeople of Riverside knew Tom as a quiet, dependable man. Respectful, hardworking, but also distant. Some called him shy. Others thought him strange for preferring solitude. Tom didn't mind what they thought. He had his routine, his family, and that was enough. But everything changed on a cold October evening, exactly 1 year and 2 months before the northern conflict would reach Riverside and pull Tom into a world he never imagined. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows through the forest. Tom had spent the day checking his traps in the woods north of town, a route he'd walked 100 times before. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, and his mind was on getting home before dark. Eleanor was making pot roast that night, and he'd promised to join her and Sarah for dinner. The forest was unusually quiet. No birds singing, no rustling in the underbrush. Tom should have noticed, should have recognized the warning signs, but his mind was elsewhere, thinking about whether he needed to repair his boat's engine before winter set in. Then he heard it, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Tom froze. Slowly, carefully, he unslung his rifle and turned toward the sound. There, emerging from behind a massive oak tree, was a black bear. And not just any bear. This was a massive creature, easily 7 feet tall when it rose on its hind legs, which it did the moment it spotted Tom. Tom's heart hammered in his chest. He knew bears. He'd encountered them before, always giving them a wide berth, making noise to scare them off. But this one was different. Its eyes were wild, desperate. It was injured, Tom realized, noticing the gash along its side, probably from a territorial fight with another bear. Wounded animals were unpredictable, dangerous. Tom raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking. He'd never been good under pressure, never been the type to keep his cool in a crisis. The bear charged. Time seemed to slow down. Tom fired, but the shot went wide, splintering bark from a tree to the bear's left. The bear didn't even flinch. It was on him in seconds, massive and terrifying, its roar deafening in the quiet forest. Tom fell backward, the rifle flying from his hands. He threw his arms up instinctively, knowing it wouldn't be enough, knowing that this was how his story ended, alone in the woods like some tragic tale the townspeople would whisper about for years to come. But the killing blow never came. Instead, Tom heard barking. Fierce, aggressive barking. And then a black blur launched itself at the bear, teeth flashing, snarling with a ferocity that made even the massive bear stumble backward. It was a dog, a black German shepherd, thin and scraggly, but fighting with the courage of an animal 3 times its size. The dog latched onto the bear's injured side, tearing at the wound, forcing the bear to turn its attention away from Tom. The bear swatted at the dog, catching it with one massive paw and sending it tumbling across the forest floor. But the dog got back up, limping now, and charged again, barking, snapping, never giving up. Tom scrambled backward, grabbed his rifle, and this time, his hands were steady. He fired. The shot echoed through the forest, and the bear roared in pain, then turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush until the sound faded into nothing. For a moment, there was only silence and the sound of Tom's ragged breathing. Then he remembered the dog. Tom rushed over to where the animal had fallen. The black German shepherd was lying on its side, panting heavily, blood matting its fur from a deep gash along its shoulder and ribs where the bear's claws had connected. The dog's eyes met Tom's, dark and intelligent, and despite its pain, its tail gave a weak wag. "Easy, boy," Tom whispered, his voice hoarse. "Easy. You saved my life." The dog whimpered softly but didn't try to move. Tom carefully removed his jacket and wrapped it around the dog as gently as he could. The animal was malnourished, ribs showing through its fur, clearly a stray that had been surviving on its own for who knows how long. But despite its condition, it had thrown itself at a bear to save a stranger. Tom lifted the dog carefully, cradling it in his arms. It was heavier than it looked, even malnourished. "I've got you," Tom said quietly. "I've got you." And with that, Tom began the long walk home, carrying the dog that had saved his life, not knowing that this moment would change everything. Tom didn't take the dog to the veterinarian in town. Doc Miller was good with farm animals, but had a reputation for being expensive and not particularly gentle. Instead, Tom brought the dog to his cabin, laid it carefully on a blanket near the fireplace, and set to work cleaning and bandaging the wounds himself. He'd treated plenty of hunting injuries before, both his own and animals he'd intended to eat. This was different, though. This animal had earned his care. He worked through the night, cleaning the gashes, applying salve, wrapping bandages. The dog bore it all with remarkable patience, only whimpering occasionally, watching Tom with those intelligent dark eyes. "You need a name," Tom said as he worked, his voice soft in the quiet cabin. He thought for a moment, then nodded. "Buck. You fought like a buck defending its territory. That'll be your name." Buck's tail thumped weakly against the floor. Over the next few days, Tom barely left the cabin. He called his mother to explain he wouldn't be coming to town, told her he was nursing an injured animal back to health. Eleanor wanted to come see, but Tom asked her to give him some time. He wasn't sure why he wanted to keep Buck to himself for a while, but he did. Tom fed Buck small portions of fish and meat, fresh water, kept the wounds clean, and changed the bandages twice a day. And slowly, remarkably, Buck began to recover. By the end of the first week, the dog was standing, walking carefully around the cabin. By the second week, Buck was following Tom everywhere, limping less each day, gaining weight, his coat beginning to shine. Tom discovered that Buck was young, probably only 2 or 3 years old, and incredibly smart. Within days, Buck understood basic commands, seemed to anticipate what Tom needed before he asked for it. When Tom went to check his boat, Buck followed. When Tom went hunting, Buck stayed close, alert, watching everything. The townspeople of Riverside noticed the change in Tom, too. He smiled more, seemed less isolated. Some folks met Buck when Tom brought him to town for supplies, and they were impressed by the dog's discipline and intelligence. Sarah fell in love with Buck immediately, calling him a gentle giant, while Eleanor appreciated how the dog seemed to watch over Tom. Tom and Buck developed a routine. Mornings on the boat, Buck sitting at the bow, watching the water. Afternoons in the forest, hunting together, Buck's nose proving invaluable for tracking deer. Evenings by the fire, Buck's head resting on Tom's lap while Tom read or simply sat in comfortable silence. For the first time since his father died, Tom didn't feel alone. Buck wasn't just a pet. He was a companion, a partner, a friend. In the quiet moments, Tom would talk to Buck about things he'd never told another soul, his fears, his doubts, his dreams of maybe one day having a family of his own. Buck would listen, those intelligent eyes never leaving Tom's face. And somehow Tom knew that the dog understood. Not the words, perhaps, but the meaning behind them. 1 year passed like this. One perfect year of peace and companionship. Tom had never been happier. But the world outside Riverside was changing. Tensions were rising. News reports spoke of conflicts brewing in the northern territories, of military buildups, of whispers that war was coming. Tom didn't pay much attention to the news. Politics and war seemed like distant concerns, things that happened to other people in other places. Riverside was far from any borders, far from any strategic importance. The conflict, if it came, wouldn't touch them. Tom was wrong. It started with posters appearing in town. Bold letters declaring, "Your country needs you," with an image of a soldier standing proud beneath a waving flag. Then came the radio announcements, the president's voice crackling through speakers in the general store, in the diner, in homes across America, speaking of duty, of freedom, of the threat posed by the Northern Coalition. The Northern conflict had begun. Enemy forces had invaded Allied territory, and the United States was joining the war effort. A draft was being implemented. All able-bodied men between the ages of 20 and 35 were required to register. Tom registered because he had to, not because he wanted to. He stood in line at the town hall with dozens of other young men from Riverside and the surrounding areas, filling out forms, answering questions about his health and background. The recruiter, a stern-faced sergeant with more medals on his chest than Tom could count, looked him over with barely concealed skepticism. Fisherman and hunter, the sergeant read from Tom's form. Any military experience? No, sir, Tom said quietly. Ever fired a weapon under pressure? Tom thought of the bear, of his hands shaking, of the shot that went wide. No, sir. The sergeant sighed. You'll report for basic training in 2 weeks. Try not to wash out. Tom left the town hall with a knot in his stomach and a piece of paper telling him where to report. 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks before his life changed forever. That night, Tom sat on his cabin porch with Buck at his feet, staring out at the river. The water was dark and calm, reflecting the stars above. Buck sensed Tom's distress and pressed close against his leg, offering silent comfort. I don't know if I can do this, Buck, Tom said quietly. I'm not a soldier. I'm not brave like you. I'm just a fisherman who likes to be left alone. Buck looked up at him, and in those dark eyes, Tom saw something that made his throat tighten. Trust. Complete, unwavering trust. I can't take you with me, Tom continued, his voice breaking slightly. You'll stay here with Ma and Sarah. They'll take care of you. You'll be safe. But even as he said it, Tom knew it was a lie. Not about his mother and sister taking care of Buck. They would do that gladly. But about Buck being safe without him. They'd formed a bond that went beyond pet and owner. They were partners. They belonged together. The next morning, Tom made a decision that would change both their lives. He'd heard rumors, whispers really, about a new military program. The War Dog Program, they called it. Dogs trained for combat, used to detect mines, carry messages, scout enemy positions. It was experimental, controversial even, but it was real. If Tom had to go to war, maybe Buck could come with him. Tom spent the next week making inquiries, calling numbers he found in military pamphlets, writing letters to addresses that might not even exist. Finally, 3 days before he was scheduled to report for basic training, he received a telegram. It was brief, almost curt. War Dog Program accepting applications. Report to Fort Harrison with candidate animal. Evaluation required. No guarantees. Tom read the telegram 3 times, then looked down at Buck, who sat patiently beside him, head tilted in that curious way he had. What do you think, boy? Tom asked. Want to be a soldier? Buck's tail wagged once, twice. Tom folded the telegram and made his decision. They'd go together, or they wouldn't go at all. The morning Tom left Riverside was gray and cold. A light rain fell, turning the dirt roads to mud and making the river churn with muddy brown water. Tom stood outside his mother's house, his single duffel bag at his feet, Buck sitting calmly beside him, wearing a makeshift collar Tom had fashioned from leather. Eleanor Hanks stood on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, trying not to cry. She was a strong woman, had raised 2 children mostly on her own after James died, but seeing her son leave for war was testing every bit of that strength. Sarah stood beside her mother, tears already streaming down her face. She'd always been the emotional one in the family, wearing her heart on her sleeve in a way Tom never could. "You don't have to take him," Eleanor said, gesturing to Buck. "He could stay here, keep us company, keep us safe until you come home." "Ma," Tom said quietly, "Buck needs to come with me. We're partners. And maybe having him there will help me get through this." Eleanor wiped her eyes and nodded. She understood, even if she didn't like it. She came down from the porch and pulled Tom into a fierce hug, holding him tight. "You come home," she whispered fiercely. "You hear me, Thomas Edward Hank? You come home safe." "I will, Ma. I promise." It was a promise Tom had no business making, but he made it anyway because it was what she needed to hear. Sarah hugged him next, sobbing into his shoulder. "I'll write every week," she promised. "And I'll keep a journal of everything that happens here so you don't miss anything." "I'd like that," Tom said, surprised to find his own eyes burning with tears. Finally, Eleanor knelt down in front of Buck. The dog regarded her with his calm, intelligent gaze. Eleanor placed both hands on either side of Buck's face, looking directly into his eyes. "You take care of my boy," she said, her voice firm despite the tears on her cheeks. "You bring him home to me. Can you do that?" Buck's tail wagged, and he leaned forward to lick Eleanor's cheek gently. She laughed through her tears and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, hugging him tight. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good boy." Tom loaded his duffel bag into the bed of old Miller's truck. Mr. Miller, a neighbor who'd volunteered to drive Tom to the train station, sat in the driver's seat, giving the family their moment. "Time to go, son," Mr. Miller called gently. Tom nodded. He gave his mother and sister one last hug, then whistled softly. Buck immediately came to his side. Together, they climbed into the truck bed, Buck settling down beside Tom's bag. As the truck pulled away, Tom looked back at his mother and sister standing in the rain, waving, getting smaller and smaller until they were just silhouettes. He looked at his cabin, at the river beyond, at the forest where he and Buck had hunted together for a year. This was his home, his whole world, and he was leaving it behind, stepping into an unknown future filled with danger and death. Buck pressed against Tom's leg, solid and warm and present. "Together," Tom said quietly, more to himself than to Buck. "We'll face it together." The train station was crowded with young men and their families, all saying their goodbyes. Some were excited, eager for adventure. Others looked terrified. Tom felt numb, disconnected from it all. He boarded the train with Buck at his side, found an empty compartment, and sat down by the window. As the train lurched into motion, carrying him away from everything he'd ever known, Tom placed his hand on Buck's head and closed his eyes. The journey to war had begun. Fort Harrison was nothing like Riverside. Where Tom's hometown was all trees and water and quiet spaces, the military base was stark and brutal, all concrete and barbed wire, and the constant sound of shouting drill sergeants and marching boots. Tom and Buck arrived in the late afternoon, along with 36 other recruits. They were herded off the train and onto buses, then driven through the base to a sprawling complex of buildings. Tom held Buck's makeshift leash tight, keeping the dog close as they were processed. Paperwork, medical examinations, uniform distribution, assignment to barracks. But when Tom asked about the war dog program, about where to take Buck for evaluation, he was met with confusion and dismissal. "War dog program?" a corporal repeated, looking at Tom like he'd grown a second head. "Kid, dogs don't belong on a military base. You'll have to send it home." "I have authorization," Tom insisted, pulling out the crumpled telegram. "I was told to report here with my dog for evaluation." The corporal sighed, made a phone call, then another, then finally directed Tom to a building on the far side of the base. "Building 7. Ask for Captain Morrison." "And Hank, don't get your hopes up. They've got standards." Building 7 was smaller than the others, tucked away like an afterthought. Tom knocked on the door and waited. Buck sat beside him, patient as always. The door opened to reveal a man in his 40s with gray at his temples and shrewd, calculating eyes. Captain David Morrison, according to the nameplate on his uniform. You Hank? Morrison asked. Yes, sir. Thomas Hank. I'm here about the war dog program. Morrison's gaze dropped to Buck, and for a long moment, he just stared. Then he knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the dog. Buck met his gaze calmly, not backing down, but not aggressive either. Black German Shepherd, Morrison said. Good breed for military work. Strong, intelligent, loyal. How long have you had him? A year, sir. He saved my life from a bear attack. I've trained him for hunting, following commands. Saved your life, Morrison repeated, standing up. He looked at Tom with new interest. Tell me about it. Tom told the story, all of it, from the attack to Buck's injuries to their year together. Morrison listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When Tom finished, Morrison nodded slowly. We'll evaluate him. 5 days of testing. Physical conditioning, obedience, temperament, ability to work under stress. If he passes, you both enter the war dog training program together. 8 weeks of intensive training. If he fails, you continue with standard basic training, and the dog goes home. Understood. Yes, sir. One more thing, Hank, Morrison said, his voice hard. This program isn't a guarantee that you'll serve together. Even if he passes training, deployment decisions are made based on unit needs. You could end up on opposite sides of the world. Are you prepared for that? Tom looked down at Buck, who gazed back at him with absolute trust. Yes, sir, Tom lied. I'm prepared. Morrison didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Report here at 0600 tomorrow. Bring the dog. The next 5 days were the longest of Tom's life. Each morning, he brought Buck to Building 7, where Morrison and 2 other trainers put the dog through a series of increasingly difficult tests. Tom wasn't allowed to watch most of them, had to wait outside while they worked with Buck, teaching him new commands, exposing him to loud noises, testing his reactions to simulated combat situations. Meanwhile, Tom began basic training with the other recruits. It was brutal. 20-mile marches with full packs. Obstacle courses that left him exhausted and bruised. Weapons training where he had to field strip and reassemble a rifle until he could do it blindfolded. Physical conditioning that pushed him past what he thought were his limits. And through it all, the other soldiers doubted him. Tom was quiet, reserved, not the type to boast or throw his weight around. He kept to himself during meals, didn't join in the camaraderie that developed among some of the recruits. To them, he seemed weak, unsuited for military life. Hank won't last a week, Tom overheard one recruit saying in the barracks. My money's on 3 days, another replied, laughing. Did you see him on the obstacle course? Damn near cried when he fell in the mud. Tom said nothing. He just lay in his bunk and thought about Buck, wondered how the dog was doing, prayed that Morrison would see what Tom saw. A brave, intelligent, loyal animal who could save lives. On the 5th day, Morrison called Tom to his office. Tom stood at attention, heart hammering, while Morrison reviewed a folder on his desk. The silence stretched out, unbearable. Finally, Morrison looked up. Sit down, Hank. Tom sat. Morrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. I've trained over 50 dogs for military service in the past 2 years. Some passed. Most didn't. The ones that failed, it wasn't because they were bad dogs. They just couldn't handle the stress, the chaos of combat. Tom's heart sank. This was a rejection. Buck had failed. Your dog, Buck, Morrison continued, is something special. In 5 days, he's mastered commands that take most dogs 3 weeks to learn. He doesn't flinch at gunfire. He doesn't panic under stress. He's focused, disciplined, and more intelligent than any dog I've ever worked with. Tom felt hope flare in his chest. He passed. Tom asked quietly. With flying colors, Morrison said, and for the first time he smiled. Congratulations, Hank. You and Buck are officially part of the War Dog program. Training starts tomorrow. Don't make me regret this. No, sir. I won't, sir. That night, Tom was allowed to see Buck for the first time in 5 days. The dog was in a kennel behind Building 7, and when Tom approached, Buck's tail began wagging furiously. Tom opened the kennel door, and Buck bounded out, jumping up and placing his paws on Tom's shoulders, licking his face with pure joy. Tom hugged the dog tight, feeling tears prick his eyes. "We did it, boy," Tom whispered. "We're soldiers now. Both of us." The war dog training program was unlike anything Tom had experienced. While other recruits continued standard basic training, Tom and Buck, along with 4 other soldier dog pairs, were pulled into Morrison's specialized program. The training was intense, grueling, and designed to forge them into a cohesive fighting unit. Tom learned to read Buck's signals, the subtle shifts in posture that indicated the dog had detected something, the difference between an alert for explosives versus an alert for enemy personnel. Buck learned to obey Tom's commands instantly, even in the chaos of simulated combat, even when every instinct told him to run. They trained together for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Mornings were physical conditioning, Tom and Buck running obstacle courses together, swimming across ponds, climbing over walls. Afternoons were tactical training, learning to navigate through mock villages, to clear buildings, to work as a team under fire. Morrison was a demanding instructor, quick to criticize, slow to praise. But Tom began to respect the man, to understand that Morrison's harshness came from a desire to keep them alive when they reached the battlefield. "Your dog is a weapon," Morrison told them during one training session. "But more than that, he's your partner. He'll save your life a dozen times over if you let him. But you have to trust him, even when it goes against your instincts." Tom learned to trust Buck completely. When Buck alerted to a buried training mine, Tom stopped immediately, no matter how sure he'd been that the path was clear. When Buck growled low in his throat during a nighttime exercise, indicating hidden enemy forces, Tom took cover even though he couldn't see the threat. And slowly, grudgingly, the other soldiers began to respect Tom too. It started during a training exercise in week 4. Tom's squad was tasked with crossing a field to reach an objective. Morrison had hidden training mines throughout the area, pressure plates that would set off loud bangs and colored smoke if triggered. Other squads had tried and failed, setting off mine after mine, filling the air with smoke and the sound of simulated explosions. When it was Tom's turn, he simply looked at Buck and said quietly, "Find them, boy." Buck moved forward slowly, nose to the ground, weaving back and forth across the field. Every time he found a mine, he sat down, alerting Tom to its location. Tom would mark the mine with a flag, and they'd continue. It took 20 minutes, but Tom and Buck cleared a path through the entire field without triggering a single mine. The other soldiers watched in stunned silence. "Holy shit," one of them breathed. "That dog is incredible." After that, Tom was no longer the weak link, the quiet guy who didn't belong. He was the dog handler, the one with the black German shepherd who could do things no human could do. Respect turned to admiration. Admiration turned to friendship. Tom made his first real friend during week 6. Michael Chun was a 24-year-old from California, quick to laugh and impossible to discourage. He'd tried to befriend Tom from the beginning, but Tom's natural reserve had kept him at a distance. But as training progressed, Michael's persistent friendliness wore down Tom's walls. "Your dog's smarter than half the guys in our unit," Michael said one evening as they sat in the barracks, cleaning their rifles. Tom smiled slightly. "Buck's special." "No kidding. How'd you end up with him?" Tom told the story of the bear attack, and Michael listened with wide eyes. "Man, that's like something out of a movie," Michael said. "You think he knew? Like, knew that you'd end up needing each other?" Tom looked over at Buck, who was lying on a blanket in the corner, watching them both. "Maybe," Tom said quietly. "Sometimes I think Buck knows things before I do." The 8 weeks of training flew by. Tom learned to handle a rifle with confidence, to think tactically, to work as part of a unit. Buck learned advanced commands, how to detect different types of explosives, how to locate wounded soldiers by scent alone, how to move silently through enemy territory. By the end of training, Tom and Buck were inseparable, anticipating each other's movements, communicating with looks and gestures more than words. Morrison watched them during their final evaluation exercise with something that might have been pride. "You two are ready," Morrison said when it was over. "You're being deployed with the 42nd Infantry Division, European Theater. You ship out in 3 days." Tom's stomach dropped. Europe. The northern conflict was raging across the continent, a brutal war of attrition. This was real now. No more training exercises. Real bullets. Real blood. Real death. That night, Tom wrote letters home. One to his mother, trying to sound brave and confident, telling her he'd made a friend named Michael and that Buck was doing wonderfully. One to Sarah, lighter in tone, describing some of the funny moments from training, the time Buck stole another soldier's lunch and led them on a chase around the base. He didn't tell them about his fear. Didn't tell them that every night he lay awake wondering if he'd freeze when the bullets started flying, if he'd get his squad killed through his own incompetence. Buck seemed to sense Tom's anxiety. The dog stayed close, pressing against Tom's leg whenever they sat together, offering silent comfort. "I'm scared, Buck," Tom admitted one night, sitting alone in the barracks after the others had fallen asleep. "I'm scared I'm not going to be good enough when it matters." Buck looked up at him with those intelligent dark eyes, and his tail wagged once. Tom managed a weak smile. "You're not scared of anything, are you?" Buck licked his hand, and somehow, that simple gesture made Tom feel a little braver. 3 days later, Tom, Buck, Michael, and 300 other soldiers boarded a transport ship bound for Europe. As the coast of America disappeared behind them, Tom stood at the rail with Buck at his side and Michael beside him. "First time leaving the country?" Michael asked. Tom nodded. "First time seeing the ocean up close." "It's beautiful," Michael said. Then, quieter and terrifying. "Yeah," Tom agreed. They stood in silence, watching the waves, preparing themselves for whatever came next. The northern conflict was waiting. The 42nd Infantry Division arrived in Europe in the midst of a brutal winter. Snow covered everything, turning the landscape into a frozen wasteland of white and gray. The front lines shifted daily, a chaotic mess of advancing and retreating forces, of villages taken and lost and taken again. Tom's company was assigned to a sector near the northern border, where enemy forces had dug in along a ridge overlooking a strategic road. The mission was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Push the enemy back, secure the ridge, hold the position. Taste of combat came during their third day in the sector. His squad was moving through a bombed-out village, checking buildings for enemy soldiers, when the shooting started. The sound was nothing like the training exercises, louder, sharper, accompanied by the whine of bullets passing close and the crash of explosions. Tom hit the ground behind a collapsed wall, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Around him, soldiers were shouting, returning fire, trying to locate the enemy position. Tom's hands shook as he gripped his rifle. Then he felt Buck press against him, solid and calm, and something in Tom steadied. "Find them," Tom commanded, his voice surprisingly firm. Buck moved forward, low to the ground, using the rubble for cover. Tom followed, keeping the dog in sight. Buck's ears were forward, alert, and suddenly he stopped, looking toward a building 50 yards ahead. He sat, his alert signal. "Enemy position in the 2-story building, 50 yards northeast," Tom called out to his squad leader, Sergeant Davis. Davis looked skeptical but radioed the information. Moments later, a squad flanked the building and captured 3 enemy soldiers who'd been using it as a sniper position. Davis clapped Tom on the shoulder. "Good work, Hank. That dog just saved lives." After that, Buck became an essential part of the squad's operations. Before moving through any area, Davis would send Tom and Buck ahead to scout for threats. Buck's nose could detect buried mines. His hearing could pick up enemy movements long before human senses could. But the war wasn't just about tactics and missions. It was about surviving day after day in brutal conditions, about watching friends die, about the constant grinding fear that the next bullet had your name on it. Tom saw his first casualty during their second week. A soldier named Rodriguez, only 19 years old, who'd shown Tom pictures of his baby daughter just that morning. Rodriguez stepped on a mine that Buck hadn't detected yet. They'd been moving too fast, pushing forward under enemy fire. The explosion was deafening. Rodriguez was dead before the medics reached him. That night, Tom sat alone in their makeshift camp, staring at nothing. He felt Buck's head rest on his lap, felt Michael sit down beside him. "Not your fault," Michael said quietly. "We were moving too fast," Tom said, his voice hollow. "I should have made them wait. Let Buck check the area properly. They would have died from enemy fire if we'd waited, Michael countered. You can't save everyone, Tom. None of us can. But Tom couldn't shake the guilt. Every time his squad moved out, every time Buck alerted to a mine or an ambush, Tom felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. These men trusted him, trusted Buck. One mistake and they'd die. The weeks blurred together. Missions and marches, firefights and frozen nights huddled in trenches. Through it all, Buck never faltered. The dog worked with unwavering dedication, detecting mines, alerting to enemy positions, even locating wounded soldiers trapped in collapsed buildings by their scent. The soldiers of Tom's company began to view Buck as something like a good luck charm. They'd pat his head before missions, share their rations with him, talk to him like he understood every word. And Buck seemed to thrive despite the danger. His black coat stood out against the snow, but he moved like a shadow, silent and deadly efficient. Tom had never been more proud of anything in his life. Commander James Hawthorne noticed Tom and Buck during a particularly difficult operation in their third month overseas. The company was tasked with clearing a suspected enemy minefield to allow supply trucks through. Other teams had tried and failed, suffering casualties from mines they couldn't detect. Hawthorne, a battle-hardened officer in his late 40s with a reputation for being tough but fair, watched as Tom and Buck methodically worked through the field. Buck's nose didn't miss a single mine. When they finished 3 hours later, they'd marked 47 explosives, creating a safe path for the convoy. Hawthorne approached Tom afterward, his weathered face showing rare approval. That's exceptional work, Private Hank, Hawthorne said. Your dog is saving lives every day. Thank you, sir, Tom said quietly. Buck does all the real work. Hawthorne smiled slightly. I think you're being modest. I've seen dog handlers who can't communicate with their animals half as well as you do with Buck. That takes skill and dedication. From that day forward, Hawthorne made a point of consulting Tom before major operations, asking for Buck's assessment of routes and positions. Tom found himself, despite his quiet nature, becoming an important voice in tactical planning. But with increased responsibility came increased danger. 4 months into their deployment, Tom's company received intelligence about a major enemy operation. Enemy forces were massing for a large-scale offensive, planning to break through Allied lines and push deep into friendly territory. The attack would come within 48 hours, but the exact location and strategy were unknown. A reconnaissance patrol was ordered to infiltrate enemy-held territory, gather intelligence, and return before the attack. It was a suicide mission, everyone knew it, but it was also critical to the defense of the entire sector. Commander Hawthorne assembled a squad of 12 soldiers for the mission. Tom and Buck were among them. We need to know where they're concentrating their forces, what routes they're planning to use, and if possible, the timing of their attack, Hawthorne briefed them. You'll move under cover of darkness, stay hidden during the day, and return within 36 hours. Any questions? Michael, who'd also been selected for the mission, raised his hand. Sir, what are our chances of making it back? Hawthorne met his gaze steadily. Honest answer? 50-50. But if you don't go, if we don't get this intelligence, hundreds of our soldiers will die when that offensive hits. The room fell silent. I need volunteers, Hawthorne said. No one's ordered to go on this mission. Every hand went up. They moved out that night, 12 soldiers and 1 dog, slipping through the lines and into enemy territory. The snow helped, covering their tracks, muffling their movements. Tom kept Buck close, trusting the dog's senses to warn them of enemy patrols. For 2 days, they moved like ghosts through enemy-held villages and forests, observing, documenting, gathering intelligence. Buck alerted them to enemy patrols 3 times, allowing them to hide and avoid detection. They saw the enemy forces massing, saw the supply convoys, the artillery being positioned. And then, on the second night, Buck found something else. They were moving through a partially destroyed building when Buck suddenly froze, his nose working furiously. He moved to a pile of rubble in the corner and began pawing at it, whining urgently. What is it, boy? Tom whispered. The squad leader, Lieutenant Parks, signaled for everyone to take cover while Tom investigated. Tom carefully moved the rubble aside, expecting to find a mine or unexploded ordnance. Instead, he found a leather satchel, partially buried, stamped with enemy military insignia. Inside the satchel were maps. Detailed tactical maps showing the entire enemy offensive, troop movements, artillery positions, supply routes, and most importantly, the exact date and time of the attack, 30 hours from now. Holy shit, Lieutenant Parks breathed, looking at the maps by flashlight. This is their entire battle plan. How did Buck know to look there? Michael asked, staring at the dog in amazement. Tom shook his head, scratching Buck behind the ears. I don't know. He just knew. The return journey was even more dangerous. They were carrying intelligence that could turn the tide of the entire campaign, which meant they couldn't risk losing it. They moved faster, took fewer precautions, racing against time to get the information back to Allied command. Buck saved them twice more during the return journey. Once, alerting to an enemy patrol that would have walked right into them. Again, detecting a newly laid minefield that hadn't been there on their way in. They crossed back into Allied territory with 6 hours to spare before the attack was scheduled to begin. Exhausted, filthy, but alive, all 12 soldiers and one remarkable dog. Commander Hawthorne met them personally, taking the satchel from Lieutenant Parks with shaking hands. You did it, Hawthorne said, emotion thick in his voice. You actually did it. The intelligence Buck had found allowed Allied command to reposition forces, reinforce weak points, and prepare ambushes along the enemy's planned routes. When the offensive came, it was met with devastating resistance. What should have been a breakthrough became a catastrophic defeat for enemy forces. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Allied lives were saved because of that intelligence. And it was Buck who had found it. That night, Hawthorne came to the barracks where Tom and Buck were resting. The commander knelt down beside Buck and solemnly saluted the dog. You're a hero, Buck, Hawthorne said. A genuine war hero. Buck's tail wagged, and he licked Hawthorne's hand. Hawthorne turned to Tom. And you, Private Hank, you've earned a commendation. What you and Buck did out there, that's the kind of courage and skill that wins wars. Tom felt his throat tighten. Just doing our job, sir. Well, keep doing it, Hawthorne said, standing. We need soldiers like you. Both of you. After Hawthorne left, Michael sat down beside Tom, grinning ear to ear. Man, you and Buck are legends now, Michael said. I heard soldiers from other companies talking about the black German shepherd who found the enemy battle plans. They're calling him Buck the Brave. Tom looked down at Buck, who was already half asleep, exhausted from their mission. He is brave, Tom said softly. Braver than any of us. The winter deepened, and with it came a period of intense fighting. The enemy, reeling from their failed offensive, became desperate and unpredictable. Battles erupted without warning. Casualties mounted on both sides. Through it all, Buck continued his work, and his legend grew. There was the time Buck led a rescue team to a collapsed bunker where 8 soldiers were trapped under rubble. Buck had detected them by scent alone, barking and pawing at a specific spot until rescuers dug down and found the men, bruised and shaken but alive. There was the night Buck detected an enemy infiltration team trying to sneak through Allied lines to sabotage supply depots. Buck's alert allowed the infiltrators to be captured before they could carry out their mission. There was the mission where Buck detected a buried cache of enemy explosives meant to destroy a bridge. The bridge was critical for Allied supply lines, and its destruction would have set operations back by weeks. Each time, Buck's actions saved lives. Each time, his reputation grew. Soldiers from other companies would request Tom and Buck for their operations. Officers sought Tom's advice. Men who'd never owned a dog in their lives would sit with Buck during quiet moments, finding comfort in petting his thick black fur, talking to him about their fears and hopes. Buck became more than a military working dog. He became a symbol of hope, of loyalty, of the idea that even in the midst of war's horror, there could be moments of grace. Tom watched all of this with mixed emotions. Pride in Buck, certainly, but also growing dread. The more missions they ran, the more risks they took, the more Tom felt like they were tempting fate. Buck's invincible, Michael said one night, as if reading Tom's thoughts. Nothing can touch him. Nothing's invincible, Tom replied quietly. Not even Buck. But despite Tom's fears, Buck continued to thrive. The dog seemed to have an almost supernatural awareness of danger, an ability to sense threats before they materialized. Some soldiers joked that Buck must have a guardian angel. Others said he was simply the best war dog who'd ever lived. Tom didn't care about the labels or the legends. He just knew that Buck was his partner, his friend, and he couldn't imagine getting through this war without him. The months passed. Winter gave way to a cold, muddy spring. The war continued its grinding, brutal progression. Tom and Buck ran mission after mission. Tom watched soldiers rotate home after completing their tours, watched new recruits arrive fresh and eager only to become hardened and haunted after their first real firefight. Michael became like a brother to Tom, the two of them looking out for each other, sharing rations and secrets and fears. Michael talked about his girlfriend back home, about his plans to open a restaurant after the war. Tom talked about Riverside, about fishing on the river, about the quiet life he hoped to return to. "You think Buck will adjust to civilian life?" Michael asked one evening. Tom considered the question, watching Buck sleep peacefully despite the distant rumble of artillery. "I think Buck can adjust to anything," Tom said. "He's stronger than any of us." But Tom was wrong, because even the strongest can fall. Even heroes can die. It was late spring, nearly a year since Tom and Buck had arrived in Europe, when Allied intelligence discovered something that could potentially end the war. Enemy command had established a heavily fortified headquarters in a small town called Ravensbrück, located deep in enemy-held territory. From this headquarters, the enemy was coordinating all military operations in the region. If the headquarters could be destroyed or captured, it would cripple enemy command structure and potentially force a surrender. A major operation was planned. 3 companies, including Tom's, would launch a coordinated assault on Ravensbrück. It was the biggest operation Tom had been part of and the most dangerous. Commander Hawthorne called Tom to his command tent the night before the operation. "I'm not going to lie to you, Hank," Hawthorne said, his weathered face grave. "This is going to be hell. The enemy knows how valuable that headquarters is. They've got it defended like a fortress. We're expecting heavy casualties." "I understand, sir," Tom said quietly. "I need you and Buck on point during the approach," Hawthorne continued. "There's a road leading into Ravensbrück that we have to use to get our vehicles through. Intelligence suggests it's mined, but we don't know the extent. Buck's our best chance of clearing a path without losing half our force before we even reach the town." Tom nodded. "Buck can do it, sir." Hawthorne studied Tom for a long moment. "You've been through a lot this year, Hank. You and Buck both. I want you to know that if you want to sit this one out, if you think it's too much, I'll understand. No judgment." Tom looked down at Buck, who sat at his feet as always, watching him with those intelligent dark eyes. "We'll be there, sir," Tom said. "Buck and I see this through together." Hawthorne nodded slowly. "I expected you'd say that. You're a good soldier, Hank. One of the best I've ever commanded. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that." That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, listening to the sounds of soldiers preparing for battle, checking weapons, writing what might be final letters home. Buck lay beside the bunk, and Tom reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Big day tomorrow, boy," Tom whispered. "Maybe the biggest yet." Buck's tail thumped softly against the floor. Michael appeared beside Tom's bunk, his face serious. "Can't sleep either?" Michael asked. "No," Tom admitted. Michael sat down on the floor beside Buck, absently petting the dog. "I've got a bad feeling about tomorrow," he said quietly. "First time in this whole damn war I've had a feeling like this." "We'll be okay," Tom said, trying to sound confident. "We've made it this far." "Yeah," Michael said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Listen, if something happens to me tomorrow, I need you to do something." "Nothing's going to happen," Tom insisted. "Just listen," Michael said firmly. "If something happens, there's letters in my footlocker. One for my mom, one for my girlfriend. Make sure they get them, okay?" Tom swallowed hard. "Okay. But Michael, nothing's going to happen. We're going to get through this, go home, and you're going to open that restaurant. Remember?" Michael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, you're right." They sat in silence for a while, both petting Buck, taking comfort in the dog's calm presence. He's special, you know, Michael said eventually. Buck, he's the best of all of us. I know, Tom said softly. Promise me something, Michael said. No matter what happens tomorrow, you get Buck home safe. He's earned it. I promise, Tom said. It was a promise that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Dawn broke cold and gray. 300 soldiers assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, checking weapons, securing gear, preparing for battle. Tom stood with Buck at the head of the column, beside Commander Hawthorne and Lieutenant Parks. Remember, Hawthorne addressed the assembled troops, his voice carrying across the field. Ravensbrück is the key to ending this war. Take that headquarters, and we break their command structure. This is what we've been fighting for. This is where we make our stand. A cheer went up from the soldiers, grim and determined. Hawthorne turned to Tom. You ready, Hank? Tom looked down at Buck, who was alert and focused, ready to work. Ready, sir, Tom said. The column moved out as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Tom and Buck walked point, 50 yards ahead of the main force, checking the road for mines and ambushes. Buck's nose was to the ground, working methodically. Every few minutes, he'd alert, sitting down to indicate a buried mine. Engineers would rush forward, mark the mine, and the column would adjust its path. They found 18 mines in the first mile, 23 in the second. The road was a death trap, and without Buck, the entire column would have been destroyed before even reaching Ravensbrück. Your dog is a miracle, one of the engineers said to Tom after marking yet another mine. Tom just nodded, his attention focused on Buck, watching for any sign of fatigue or stress. But Buck seemed tireless, driven by purpose and training. They were 3 miles from Ravensbrück when the shooting started. Enemy forces had been lying in wait in the forests on either side of the road. Machine gun fire erupted from concealed positions, cutting into the Allied column. Soldiers dove for cover, returning fire, trying to locate the enemy positions. Tom hit the ground behind a fallen log. Buck pressed against him. Around them, bullets tore through the air, kicking up dirt and splinters. Buck, find them, Tom commanded. Buck moved forward, low and fast, using the terrain for cover. Tom followed, his rifle ready. Buck's ears were forward, tracking sounds that Tom couldn't hear. Suddenly Buck stopped, looking toward a thicket of trees to their right. He sat, alerting. Machine gun nest, 2 o'clock, 100 yards. Tom shouted into his radio. Mortar fire rained down on the position moments later, silencing the guns. The battle raged for 2 hours. Buck alerted to 6 different enemy positions, allowing Allied forces to outflank and neutralize them. But the cost was high. Tom watched soldiers fall, heard the screams of the wounded, saw Michael take a bullet to the shoulder and get dragged to cover by medics. But they pushed forward. They had to. Ravensbrück was within reach. By late afternoon, the Allied forces had fought their way to the outskirts of Ravensbrück. The town was a ruin, buildings bombed and burned, streets empty except for rubble and abandoned vehicles. And in the center of town, fortified behind sandbags and concrete barriers, was the enemy headquarters. Commander Hawthorne gathered his remaining officers for a final briefing. We go in at dusk, Hawthorne said. 3 teams, 3 different approaches. We overwhelm them with speed and surprise. Questions? Sir, Tom spoke up quietly. Buck's been working for 12 hours straight. He needs rest. Hawthorne looked at Tom, then at Buck, who despite everything was still alert and ready. Can he do one more sweep? Hawthorne asked. Check the approaches for mines before we commit. Tom looked down at Buck, saw the exhaustion in the dog's eyes despite his ready stance. Yes, sir, Tom said quietly. One more. As the sun set, painting Ravensbrück in shades of red and gold, Tom and Buck moved forward to scout the approaches to the headquarters. Engineers followed at a safe distance, ready to mark any mines Buck detected. Buck found 4 more mines in the rubble-strewn streets. Each time, Tom felt a spike of anxiety, knowing that Buck's exhaustion was making him slower, less precise. But the dog never faltered, never gave up. They were within 100 yards of the headquarters when Buck suddenly froze, his entire body going rigid. It wasn't his normal alert posture. Something was wrong. Buck, Tom said quietly, moving closer. Buck turned to look at Tom, and in the dog's eyes, Tom saw something he'd never seen before: fear. Then Buck lunged forward, knocking Tom backward just as machine gun fire erupted from a hidden position in the headquarters building. Bullets tore through the space where Tom had been standing a moment before. Tom hit the ground hard, Buck on top of him, shielding him with his body. "Fall back," Lieutenant Parks screamed. "It's an ambush. Fall back." Soldiers scattered, retreating to cover as more gunfire erupted from the headquarters. The enemy had been waiting, had let them get close before opening fire. Tom scrambled backward, calling for Buck to follow. But Buck didn't move. He was lying in the street, in the open, exposed to enemy fire. "Buck!" Tom screamed. "Come here, boy." Buck tried to stand but collapsed. That's when Tom saw the blood, dark and spreading across Buck's black fur. Buck had been shot. No. Tom didn't think. He just moved, running back into the open street, bullets whining past him, his entire focus on reaching Buck. "Hank, get back!" someone screamed, but Tom didn't listen. He reached Buck and scooped the dog into his arms, staggering under the weight, bullets kicking up dust around his feet. Buck whimpered softly, and the sound nearly broke Tom's heart. Tom ran, carrying Buck, his muscles screaming, his lungs burning. Enemy fire followed him every step, but somehow, miraculously, he made it back to cover. He laid Buck down gently behind a destroyed vehicle. Michael was there, his arm in a sling from his earlier wound, and he immediately began examining Buck. "Where's he hit?" Michael asked urgently. "I don't know," Tom said, his hands shaking as he tried to find the wound. "There's so much blood." It was Buck's side. A bullet had torn through just behind his front left leg. The wound was bad, bleeding heavily, but Buck was still breathing, still conscious, looking up at Tom with those dark, trusting eyes. "We need a medic," Michael shouted. "Medics are busy with human casualties," Lieutenant Parks said grimly, appearing beside them. "Hank, I'm sorry, but we can't spare medical resources for a dog right now." "He's not just a dog," Tom said fiercely, tears streaming down his face. "He's saved dozens of lives. He's earned medical treatment." Parks looked torn, then nodded. "Do what you can, but we're moving out in 5 minutes with or without you." Tom and Michael worked frantically, using field dressing supplies to pack the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Buck bore it all stoically, only whimpering when they had to apply pressure to the wound. "You're okay, boy," Tom whispered over and over. "You're going to be okay. Just hold on." But even as he said it, Tom could see Buck weakening, could see the light fading in those intelligent eyes. "We need to get him to a field hospital," Michael said urgently. "He needs real medical attention." "The nearest field hospital is 5 miles back," Tom said. "He won't make it." The assault on the headquarters began without them. Tom and Michael stayed with Buck, holding him, talking to him, refusing to leave him alone. Buck's breathing became labored. His eyes closed, then opened again, fighting to stay conscious. "Tom," Michael said quietly, his voice breaking, "I don't think he's going to make it." "No," Tom said fiercely. "No, he's strong. He's survived everything. He'll survive this." But even as Tom said it, he knew it was a lie. Then, as dawn approached, something extraordinary happened. Buck, despite his wound, despite his weakness, suddenly lifted his head. His ears came forward, alert. "What is it, boy?" Tom whispered. Buck tried to stand but couldn't. He whined urgently, looking toward the enemy headquarters, then back at Tom, then toward the headquarters again. "He's trying to tell us something," Michael said. Buck whined again, more insistent, and then did something Tom had never seen him do before. Buck bit down gently on Tom's sleeve and tugged, pulling him in the direction of a collapsed building about 30 yards away. "He wants us to go there," Tom said, his heart breaking. Buck was dying, and still he was trying to work, still trying to complete his mission. "Tom, we can't leave him," Michael said. "We have to," Tom said, understanding flooding through him. "He's found something important. We have to check it out." Tom kissed Buck's head. "Stay here, boy. We'll be right back. Just stay alive. Please." Buck's tail wagged weakly. Tom and Michael moved carefully to the collapsed building, using the pre-dawn darkness for cover. When they reached it, they found what looked like a cellar entrance, partially buried in rubble. "Help me clear this," Tom said. They worked quickly, moving aside broken beams and stones. The cellar door was locked, but Michael shot the lock off. They descended into darkness, using flashlights to illuminate the space. What they found took their breath away. The cellar was an enemy communication post, hastily abandoned during the battle. But more importantly, spread across a table in the center of the room were detailed maps and documents. Strategic plans, troop deployments, supply routes, communications codes. And in the center of it all, a leather-bound book stamped with the enemy high command seal. Michael opened the book and his eyes went wide. "Tom," Michael breathed, "this is their master operational plan. Everything. Every military operation planned for the next 6 months. Troop strengths, strategic objectives, even their contingency plans if this headquarters fell." Tom stared at the book, understanding the magnitude of what they'd found. This intelligence could end the war. Not just win a battle, in the entire northern conflict. And Buck had found it. Even dying, wounded and weak, Buck had detected something wrong about that collapsed building, had known there was something important there, had used his last reserves of strength to direct them to it. "We need to get this to Hawthorne immediately," Tom said. They gathered everything, stuffing documents into their packs. Then they ran back to where they'd left Buck. Buck was still there, still breathing, barely. His eyes opened when Tom knelt beside him. "You did it, boy," Tom said, tears streaming down his face. "You found something that's going to save thousands of lives. You're a hero, Buck. The greatest hero." Buck's tail wagged once, weakly, and Tom saw something like contentment in the dog's eyes. Commander Hawthorne arrived at their position just as the sun was rising. The headquarters had fallen. The battle was over. But when Tom showed him what they'd found, Hawthorne's exhausted face transformed with shock and hope. "Is this real?" Hawthorne asked, flipping through the master plan book. "Yes, sir," Tom said. "Buck found it. Let us write to it." Hawthorne looked down at Buck, lying on his side, breath coming in shallow gasps. "Get this dog to a medic," Hawthorne ordered. "I don't care how busy they are. This dog has earned every possible care we can give him." 2 medics came running, carrying a stretcher. They loaded Buck onto it carefully, and Tom walked beside the stretcher as they carried Buck toward the field hospital that had been set up in a secured building. "Hang on, Buck," Tom whispered, holding the dog's paw. "Just a little longer. They're going to fix you up. You're going to be okay." Buck's eyes were closed now, his breathing barely visible. The medics worked on Buck for 3 hours. Tom paced outside the medical tent, refusing to leave, refusing to eat or rest. Michael sat with him, both of them silent, waiting. Finally, the chief medical officer emerged. His face was grave. "We've done everything we can," the doctor said quietly. "The bullet missed his vital organs, but there was massive blood loss and tissue damage. We've stabilized him for now, but the next 24 hours are critical. If he makes it through the night, he has a chance." Tom was allowed to sit with Buck. The dog was unconscious, wrapped in bandages, connected to an 4. Tom held Buck's paw and talked to him, telling him about Riverside, about the river, about all the fishing trips they'd take when they got home. Hours passed. The sun set. Night fell. And Buck kept breathing. By morning, the dog's condition had improved slightly. He was still unconscious, still critical, but alive. Tom stayed by Buck's side for 3 days. During that time, the intelligence Buck had found was transmitted to Allied High Command. The enemy's master operational plan was analyzed, dissected, used to plan counteroffensives and strategic operations. Within 2 weeks, Allied forces had pushed deep into enemy territory, exploiting weaknesses revealed in the master plan. Enemy supply lines were cut. Key positions were overrun. The enemy command structure, already reeling from the loss of their headquarters at Ravensbrück, began to collapse. 6 weeks after Buck found the master plan, the enemy sued for peace. The northern conflict was over. The war had ended, in large part because of intelligence that a black German shepherd had led his handler to find. Buck recovered slowly. The wound healed, leaving a jagged scar across his side, but the dog survived. Within a month, he was walking again. Within 6 weeks, he was almost back to his old self, though he tired more easily, and couldn't run quite as fast as before. Tom never left his side during the recovery. Even after the war ended, even when other soldiers began rotating home, Tom requested to stay until Buck was fully healed and cleared for travel. Commander Hawthorne approved the request without hesitation. "That dog saved this war," Hawthorne said. "Take all the time you need." Michael had already been sent home, his shoulder wound earning him an early discharge. Before he left, he'd hugged Tom tight and made him promise to visit when he got back to the States. "You and Buck," Michael had said, his eyes bright with tears. "You're my brothers. Don't forget that." Finally, 3 months after the war ended, Buck was cleared for travel. Tom and Buck, along with a group of other soldiers, were scheduled to board a transport ship home. The extraction point was a secured airfield 50 miles from their current position. A convoy of trucks would take them there. The mood was jubilant. The war was over. They were going home. Soldiers laughed and joked, talking about the families they'd see, the lives they'd reclaim. Tom sat in the back of one of the trucks with Buck beside him, watching the countryside roll past. It felt surreal, the idea that the war was actually over, that he and Buck had survived. Commander Hawthorne was riding in the lead vehicle, heading home himself after 3 years of continuous deployment. They were 30 miles from the airfield when it happened. The convoy slowed to navigate through a bombed-out village, one of thousands that dotted the landscape. Most of the buildings were ruins, abandoned long ago. But not all of them were abandoned. A group of enemy soldiers, stragglers who hadn't gotten word of the surrender or who refused to accept it, had been hiding in the ruins. 3 of them, bitter and angry, watching the Allied convoy with hatred. Buck sensed them first. His ears came forward, and he stood up in the truck bed, growling low in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Tom asked, immediately alert. Before Buck could answer, before Tom could react, the enemy soldiers opened fire. It wasn't a coordinated ambush. It was 3 desperate men with rifles, taking their last shot at the enemy they blamed for everything. But 3 rifles were enough. Bullets punched through the thin metal of the truck. Soldiers dove for cover, shouting, returning fire. The convoy screeched to a halt. One of the bullets was aimed at the lead vehicle, aimed at the window where Commander Hawthorne sat. Tom saw it happen as if in slow motion. Saw the muzzle flash from the ruined building. Saw the trajectory of the shot. Saw that it would hit Hawthorne, probably kill him. And saw Buck leap. The dog launched himself from the truck bed, impossibly fast despite his recent injury, throwing himself between Hawthorne's vehicle and the shooter. The bullet that was meant for Commander James Hawthorne struck Buck instead. The dog fell mid-leap, hitting the ground hard and lying still. Tom screamed. He jumped from the truck and ran to Buck, bullets still flying around him, not caring about his own safety. Buck was lying on his side, blood spreading rapidly across the dirt. The wound was in his chest, right where his heart was. Buck's eyes were open, looking up at Tom with that same trusting gaze he'd had since the day they met. "No," Tom sobbed, falling to his knees beside Buck, cradling the dog's head. "No, no, please, not now. We're going home. We made it. Please, Buck." The shooting stopped. The 3 enemy soldiers had been killed by return fire. Soldiers rushed to secure the area. Someone was calling for a medic. But Tom knew it was too late. Buck's breathing was shallow, labored. Blood bubbled from his mouth. The dog tried to wag his tail, tried to offer comfort even now, even as he was dying. Commander Hawthorne appeared beside Tom, his face stricken. The man knelt down, placed his hand on Buck's head. "He saved my life," Hawthorne said, his voice breaking. He jumped in front of the bullet. "He's always saving lives," Tom whispered, tears streaming down his face, mixing with Buck's blood. "That's all he's ever done." Buck's eyes began to close. "No," Tom said desperately. "Stay with me, boy. Just a little longer. We're almost home. Remember home? Remember Riverside? The river? We were going to go fishing. Remember?" Buck's tail moved weakly one last time. "Good boy," Tom whispered, his voice breaking completely. "Such a good boy. The best boy. I love you, Buck. I love you so much." Buck's breathing stopped. His eyes went still. And Buck, the bravest, most loyal dog who ever lived, was gone. Tom held Buck's body and wept. Around him, soldiers removed their helmets and bowed their heads. Commander Hawthorne was openly crying. This hard-bitten officer who'd seen countless deaths, undone by the loss of a dog who'd saved his life. The convoy didn't move for an hour. They wrapped Buck's body carefully in a flag and loaded him into Hawthorne's vehicle. They would bring him home. Buck had earned that much. Tom sat beside Buck's body for the rest of the journey, one hand resting on the flag, unable to speak, unable to think about anything except the emptiness where his partner, his friend, his brother had been. The war was over. But for Thomas Edward Hank, victory tasted like ashes. Tom arrived back in Riverside on a cold November morning, 3 weeks after Buck died. He came alone, carrying 2 duffel bags and a folded flag. Eleanor and Sarah were waiting at the train station, along with half the town. There were banners welcoming the soldiers home, children waving flags, people cheering. But when they saw Tom's face, when they saw that he was alone, that Buck wasn't with him, Eleanor's smile faded. She ran to her son and wrapped him in her arms. "Where's Buck?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. "He didn't make it, Ma," Tom said, his voice hollow. "He saved a man's life. The commander jumped in front of a bullet." Sarah started crying. Eleanor held Tom tighter. "I'm so sorry, baby," Eleanor whispered. "I'm so sorry." The town of Riverside mourned Buck almost as much as they celebrated Tom's return. Everyone had heard the stories, the letters Tom had sent home describing Buck's heroics, the way the dog had saved countless lives. Tom moved back into his cabin, tried to resume his old life. But everything felt wrong. The boat seemed too big without Buck sitting at the bow. The forest was too quiet without Buck padding beside him. The cabin felt empty without Buck's presence by the fire. Tom barely slept. When he did, he dreamed of Buck, of the dog's final moments, of the trust in those dark eyes even as life faded. Michael called every week, sometimes more. He'd made it home safely, was working on opening his restaurant. He always asked how Tom was doing, never satisfied with Tom's hollow assurances that he was fine. "You need to talk about it," Michael said during one call. "About Buck. About what happened. What's there to say?" Tom asked quietly. "He's gone. He was a hero," Michael said firmly. "He saved my life, saved dozens of lives, helped end the war. That deserves to be remembered, celebrated." But Tom didn't want celebrations. He wanted Buck back. 3 months after returning home, Tom received an official letter from the Department of Defense. He almost didn't open it, tired of condolence letters and certificates of appreciation. But this letter was different. It informed Tom that Buck was being posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for his actions during the war. The ceremony would be held in Washington, D.C., and Tom was requested to attend to accept the medal on Buck's behalf. Tom's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't want a medal. He wanted his dog back. But Eleanor convinced him that Buck deserved to be honored, and that Tom deserved to see that his sacrifice meant something. The ceremony was held on a sunny spring day in Washington, D.C., nearly a year after Buck's death. Tom wore his dress uniform, uncomfortable in the formal clothing, surrounded by generals and politicians and press photographers. Commander James Hawthorne was there, along with several soldiers from Tom's old company. Michael had come too, wearing a suit that looked too formal for his easygoing personality. The ceremony was brief but powerful. A General Tom didn't know spoke about Buck's service, about the mines detected, the wounded soldiers located, the intelligence that had helped in the war. Buck exemplified the best qualities of service, the general said. Loyalty, courage, selflessness. He gave his life to save another, the ultimate sacrifice. His actions saved hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives. He was a true American hero. The medal was presented to Tom in a velvet box. It was beautiful, meaningless. Tom would have traded every medal in the world for one more day with Buck. After the ceremony, Hawthorne approached Tom. "Tom," Hawthorne said, "I want to thank you. For Buck. For everything you both did." Tom replied quietly that Buck was just doing his job. "No," Hawthorne said firmly. "He was being extraordinary. And so were you. You trained him, trusted him, partnered with him. His success was your success." Hawthorne paused, then continued, "Buck saved my life. I have a wife and 3 daughters. Because of Buck, I got to see them again. I got to hold my youngest daughter, who was born while I was overseas. That's a gift I can never repay." Tom felt his throat tighten. "I'm glad he saved you, sir." Buck always knew who needed saving. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Tom stood awkwardly in the corner, overwhelmed by people wanting to shake his hand, to tell him what Buck meant to them. A newspaper reporter approached, asking for an interview. "What made Buck special?" the reporter asked, pencil poised over a notepad. Tom thought about the question. About Buck jumping at a bear to save a stranger. About Buck finding hidden mines and enemy positions. About Buck detecting the master plan that ended the war. About Buck leaping in front of a bullet to save Commander Hawthorne. "Buck had the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known," Tom said quietly. "Human or animal. He never hesitated to help, never counted the cost to himself. He just saw someone in need and acted. That's what made him special." The reporter scribbled furiously. "Do you think there will ever be another dog like Buck?" Tom shook his head. "No. Buck was one of a kind." 6 months after the ceremony in Washington, Tom received another letter, this time from the Riverside Town Council. They wanted to build a memorial to Buck. Tom met with the council in the town hall, the same building where he'd registered for the draft years ago. The mayor, old Mr. Patterson, explained the plan. "We want to honor Buck," Patterson said. "He was from Riverside, same as you. We're proud of what he did, what you both did. We thought a statue in the dog park would be appropriate. A place where families can bring their children, tell them about Buck's story." Tom sat silently, processing this. "We'd like your input on the design," Patterson continued. "What pose you think would be best, what inscription to include." Tom thought about Buck. About the dog sitting alert, focused on a mission. About Buck running through the forest, joyful and free. About Buck lying by the fire, peaceful and content. "Show him alert," Tom said finally. "Head up, ears forward." That's how he was most of the time. Always watching, always ready to help. The statue was commissioned from a sculptor in the city, a woman named Catherine Brooks who specialized in animal sculptures. She came to Riverside to meet with Tom, to learn about Buck. Tom spent an afternoon with her, showing her pictures of Buck, describing the dog's personality, his movements, his spirit. He wasn't just obedient, Tom explained. He was intelligent. You could see him thinking, making decisions. His eyes were so expressive. Brooks listened, sketched, asked questions. A month later, she presented her design. Buck sitting at attention, head held high, ears forward, one paw slightly raised as if ready to move at a moment's notice. Captured in bronze, the design perfectly embodied Buck's alert readiness, his noble bearing. The inscription, chosen by Tom, would read, "Buck, a true hero. He saved lives through courage, loyalty, and love. Never forgotten." The statue was unveiled on the anniversary of Buck's death, 2 years after Tom had returned home. The entire town gathered in the dog park, along with veterans from across the state, soldiers who'd served with Tom and Buck, and members of the press. Commander Hawthorne came, now retired from the military and working in Veterans Affairs. Michael came with his new wife. Even Captain Morrison, Buck's first trainer, made the journey. Eleanor and Sarah stood beside Tom as the covering was removed from the statue. There was a moment of silence as everyone saw it for the first time. Then applause erupted, along with tears. The statue was perfect. Catherine Brooks had captured something essential about Buck, not just his physical form, but his spirit. Looking at the bronze dog, you could almost believe he might move, might turn his head to look at you with those intelligent eyes. Tom stepped forward and placed his hand on the statue's head, the metal warm from the sun. "Hey boy," he whispered. "They remembered you." Everyone remembered. Various speakers talked about Buck's service, his heroism, his impact. Hawthorne spoke about Buck saving his life. A general read a letter from the president, honoring Buck's sacrifice. When it was Tom's turn to speak, he stood before the crowd, uncomfortable with the attention but knowing he owed Buck this much. "Buck was my best friend," Tom began, his voice quiet but clear. "He saved my life when a bear attacked me, and from that moment on, we were partners. He went to war with me because I asked him to. He served with courage because that was his nature. He saved countless lives because he was the best of us." Tom paused, emotion thick in his throat. "I miss him every day. Miss his presence, his loyalty, his friendship. But I'm grateful for the time we had together. Buck taught me what it means to be brave, to be selfless, to put others before yourself. He was just a dog to some people, but to me, to the soldiers who served with him, to the families of the men whose lives he saved, Buck was a hero. The greatest hero. The crowd was silent, many wiping away tears. Thank you for remembering him, Tom finished. For making sure his story isn't forgotten. Buck deserves that much and more. After the statue unveiling, Tom was approached by a representative from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The government was offering compensation to Tom's family for Buck's service and sacrifice. The amount was substantial, more money than Tom had seen in his life. The representative explained that Buck's service had been deemed invaluable to the war effort, and the compensation reflected that. Tom accepted the check and brought it home to his mother. Eleanor looked at the amount and gasped. Tom, this is enough to pay off the house, enough to send Sarah to college, enough to buy a new boat for your fishing business. Tom nodded quietly. Sarah hugged Tom. Buck gave us this, she said, tears in her eyes. Even now, he's still taking care of us. The family used the money wisely. Eleanor paid off the house and put aside money for Sarah's education. Tom bought a new, larger fishing boat, one that could support him and eventually hire help as his business grew. But no amount of money felt like enough. No compensation could fill the hole Buck left behind. One evening, Tom sat on his cabin porch, watching the sunset over the river. Eleanor came and sat beside him, bringing 2 cups of coffee. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Eleanor spoke. You know what I think? Eleanor said. I think Buck knew that saving Commander Hawthorne would cost him his life. But he did it anyway because that's who he was. Tom nodded, unable to speak. He loved you, Eleanor continued, and he trusted that you would be okay without him. That's the greatest gift he could give you, the confidence that you're strong enough to carry on. I'm not strong enough, Tom said, his voice breaking. I needed him, Ma. I still need him. I know, baby, Eleanor said gently. But Buck's not really gone. He's in that statue, in the stories people tell, in the lives he saved. And he's here. She placed her hand over Tom's heart. Always. Tom finally let himself cry, really cry, for the first time since Buck's death. He wept for his friend, his partner, his brother. Eleanor held him and let him grieve. Years passed. Tom's fishing business grew. He hired help, expanded his operations. Sarah went to college, became a teacher, married a good man. Eleanor aged gracefully, taking pride in her children and, eventually, her grandchildren. Tom never got another dog. It felt wrong somehow, disloyal to Buck's memory. But he visited the statue regularly, often bringing fresh flowers. Parents brought their children to see the statue, telling them Buck's story. Veterans came to pay their respects, remembering their own war dogs, their own lost companions. Buck's story was told in schools, written about in books, featured in documentaries. He became a symbol of the bond between humans and animals, of loyalty and sacrifice, of heroism in its purest form. Michael kept his promise and opened his restaurant, a successful place that became a local landmark in California. He named it Buck's Place, with a photo of Buck prominently displayed behind the bar. Every year on the anniversary of Buck's death, Michael would close the restaurant and travel to Riverside to visit the statue with Tom. Commander James Hawthorne stayed in touch with Tom for the rest of his life. He told his daughters about Buck, made sure they understood that they existed because a brave dog had sacrificed himself. Hawthorne's youngest daughter, Emma, became a veterinarian, inspired by Buck's story. 10 years after Buck's death, on the anniversary, Tom stood before the statue with a crowd of hundreds. Veterans, families, children, all there to remember. Tom placed a wreath at the base of the statue, then stood back and looked up at Buck's bronze face. I'm doing okay, boy, Tom said quietly, though the crowd could hear him in the silence. It's been hard without you, but I'm doing okay. Ma's good. Sarah's good. She's got kids now, did I tell you? 2 boys and a girl. They love hearing stories about you. Tom paused, swallowing hard. I think about you every day. Wonder what you'd think of how things turned out. The war's over. We won, thanks in large part to you. The country's at peace. People are happy. A breeze stirred, rustling the trees around the park. "I miss you," Tom said simply. "But I understand why you did what you did. You saw someone who needed saving, and you saved them. Just like you always did. Just like that day with the bear. That's who you were. My brave, loyal, beautiful boy." Tom reached out and touched the statue one more time. "Rest easy, Buck," Tom whispered. "You earned it." As Tom turned to walk away, he could have sworn he heard it. The sound of a tail thumping against the ground, the way Buck's tail used to when he was happy. But when Tom looked back, there was only the statue, bronze and eternal, watching over the park where children played and families gathered and life continued. Buck was gone, but his legacy remained. In the lives he'd saved, in the war he'd helped end, in the hearts of everyone who'd known him and everyone who'd heard his story. A hero's legacy, a friend's love, a dog's devotion, never forgotten. This is the story of Thomas Edward Hank and Buck, a black German shepherd who became one of the most decorated war dogs in history. While their story took place during a fictional conflict, it represents the real sacrifices made by countless military working dogs and their handlers throughout history. Buck's legacy lives on in Riverside, in the hearts of those who knew him, and in the reminder that heroism comes in many forms, sometimes on four legs with a wagging tail and an unbreakable spirit. May we never forget the animals who serve alongside us, who save our lives, and who ask for nothing in return but our love and loyalty. This story is dedicated to all the Bucks of the world, past, present, and future. Thank you for your service.
Not every hero wears a uniform. Some walk on four legs and never come home. If you believe stories like this matter, a like or subscription helps more people hear them. Thank you for staying until the end.